A brand new study. What did they discover about these women? They belong to a human lineage we've never seen before. Lost lineage. The study estimates around 50,000 years ago. Maybe not Atlantis. Okay, picture this. The Sahara. But forget the endless, sun-baked desert we imagine today. Think lush, green, a vast savanna teeming with life. Hard to wrap your head around, isn't it? Yet thousands of years ago, that was the reality. And smack bang in the middle of what's now just sand, there's a place called the Takarkori rock shelter in Libya. It's like a tiny keyhole, peering back into that lost green world. We're not just talking vague hints here. We're diving deep into some serious science. A brand new study, hot off the press in April 2025, published in Nature, is completely rewriting the story of who lived in this Green Sahara. This isn't just another dig finding old pottery. No, we're talking ancient DNA. And not just any DNA. This comes from two women who lived in Takarkori about 7,000 years ago. And get this, they were naturally mummified. The preservation, off the charts. It's like a direct, high-definition link back to the Green Sahara period. What's truly mind-blowing is the level of detail. A few years back, in 2019, scientists got some mitochondrial DNA. Cool, but limited. This new study? They went all out. Full genome analysis. It's like upgrading from a blurry snapshot to a full 4K movie of their genetic code. So we're not just learning about hair color here. This is about understanding an entire lost population, maybe even a lost tribe. What does their story tell us about human history, about adaptation, about how we spread across the planet? Buckle up, because this deep dive is going to challenge everything you thought you knew about the Sahara. Let's set the scene. This Green Sahara wasn't some fleeting phase. We're talking thousands of years, roughly from 14,500 down to 5,000 years ago. Can you even imagine the scale of that transformation? From a vibrant savanna crisscrossed with rivers and lakes, back to the hyper-arid desert we see today. The archaeology is staggering. Rock art depicting giraffes, rhinos, animals that couldn't survive there now. Tools designed for a totally different environment. Burial sites like Takarkori itself, packed with clues about their lives. It's a whole vanished world, waiting to be pieced back together. Takarkori is a treasure trove. 15 individuals were found buried there over a long span from about 8,900 to 4,800 years ago. But those two women, the ones from 7,000 to 6,000 years ago, they're the stars, not just because of the incredible mummification, but because of what their DNA reveals. It's honestly incredible they even got usable DNA. The desert isn't exactly known for preserving organic material. Heat, dryness, usually DNA just crumbles to dust. But this natural mummification acted like a perfect time capsule. Nada Salem, the study's lead author, admitted they were incredibly lucky. It's a real scientific coup. So they've got this amazing DNA. What's the headline? What did they discover about these women and their people? Okay, drum roll. They belong to a human lineage we've never seen before. A lineage seemingly unique to North Africa. And what's more, they were genetically isolated from other groups for a really, really long time. A lost lineage. How far back are we talking? When did their branch split off? The study estimates around 50,000 years ago. Think about that. That's around the time of the major out-of-Africa migrations. While other early humans were heading off to populate the rest of the globe, this group apparently stayed put in North Africa, doing their own thing. Johannes Krause, a giant in the ancient DNA field, called them a remnant of the genetic diversity present in northern Africa between 50,000 and 20,000 years ago. It's like uncovering a hidden chapter in the human story. Wow, so they might have been there before the Sahara turned green and then just rode out that entire lush period in relative isolation? That's what the DNA suggests. And here's another shocker. They found no detectable sub-Saharan African ancestry in these Takarkori women. Even during the Green Sahara, when you'd expect more mixing, more movement between north and south. You'd think all that greenery, the lakes, would turn the Sahara into a kind of highway for people, right? That was the assumption. But this finding throws a serious wrench in the works. Their closest genetic relatives weren't people from south of the Sahara or even Europeans. It was the 15,000-year-old hunter-gatherers from Takarkori Cave in Morocco. We're talking a deep connection to very ancient North African populations, a lineage stretching way, way back. And both these groups, Takarkori and Takarkori, are equally distant from sub-Saharan Africans. This strengthens the idea that gene flow across the Sahara was surprisingly limited, at least for this group. It was more like a genetic island. What about contact to the north? We know people were moving out of the Near East into Europe around this time. Did any of that ancestry mix into the Takarkori gene pool? A tiny bit. They found a faint trace, maybe a few percent, of non-African ancestry pointing towards the Levant. But it was ancient mixing, happening long before these women lived, long before herding even appeared. Crucially, there's no sign of significant genetic input from the Neolithic farmers spreading from the Near East or Europe, even though they were contemporaries. So again, the overwhelming signal is isolation. All right, the inevitable question, Neanderthal DNA. Everyone loves a bit of Neanderthal. They did have some, about 0.15%. That's more than modern sub-Saharan Africans possess, but about 10 times less than you find in Europeans or those Near Eastern farmers. What does that tell us? It suggests their distant ancestors had some limited contact, a whisper really, with populations that had migrated out of Africa and then returned, picking up a little Neanderthal DNA along the way. But the low amount in the Takarkori people reinforces the picture of isolation. Krauss called it scant contact. This paints such a fascinating picture. A population basically cut off genetically for millennia, thriving in this Green Saharan pocket. But we know from archaeology they weren't just sitting idle. They were early pastoralists, a herding society. Around 7,000 to 8,000 years ago, they started raising domesticated animals, a huge shift from the hunter-gatherer lifestyle that dominated the Sahara before. We find stone tools, distinctive pottery, baskets, even figurines. And the rock art is filled with cattle and herding scenes. It's a whole different way of life. So how did that happen? Did they just invent herding independently? That's the million-dollar question. Domesticated animals didn't originate in the Sahara. They were brought in from elsewhere. The old thinking was that herding spread through migration. New people moved in, bringing their animals and knowledge. That would fit if we saw significant genetic traces from the Near East or sub-Saharan Africa appearing around the same time. But the Takarkori DNA throws a curveball. There's no major influx of outside genes coinciding with the start of herding. It looks increasingly likely that they adopted herding through cultural exchange, not mass migration. They learned it from neighbors, perhaps through trade or smaller-scale interactions. Nada Salem herself suggests it probably spread via culture rather than large migrations. So, the idea of herding came in, maybe some animals too, but the people largely remain this distinct, isolated North African lineage. Savino di Lernia, the archaeologist who led the Takarkori excavations, put it perfectly. We know now that they were isolated in terms of genetics, but not in cultural terms. And the archaeology supports this. Pottery styles show similarities to those found in sub-Saharan Africa. Other artifacts suggest connections to the Nile Valley. It implies a network, a flow of ideas and goods, even if large groups of people weren't moving back and forth. This blows my mind. We often think of the Sahara as this impenetrable barrier, but maybe it was also a crucible, a place where unique cultures could flourish in isolation while still exchanging ideas. It gives us a whole new perspective, filling a huge gap in our understanding of Saharan prehistory. It wasn't just a transit zone, it was a cradle for unique human groups. Takarkori gives us this incredible snapshot. But were there other communities like this? Evidence points that way. Gobero in Niger is a fantastic example. Archaeologists found two distinct cultures there, the Kifian and Tenarian, both living beside a lake during the Green Sahara. The later Tenarian people also adopted herding, and their elaborate burials suggest complex social structures. It echoes what we see at Takarkori. And what about places like Nabta Playa in southern Egypt, with its megalithic structures, the apparent calendar circle? That sounds more complex than simple nomadic herders. Nabta Playa dates to the same period and hints at early astronomy, ritual practices. Then there's the mummified child from Uan Mahugiag, also in Libya, showing sophisticated mortuary practices. Maybe not cities or writing in the classic sense, but clearly these Green Sahara cultures were advanced in their adaptation, their art, their social structures, perhaps even early forms of science. It feels like a whole chapter of human history we're just beginning to decipher. They thrived in the Green Sahara, but well, all good things must end. What happened when the desert returned? Around 5,000 years ago, the climate shifted decisively back towards dryness. The Green Sahara withered. Places like Takarkori were abandoned. And the people? Their story becomes murky. This specific lineage, the one revealed by the Takarkori DNA, seems to vanish from the archaeological and genetic record in its pure form. But here's a tantalizing clue. The study found faint genetic traces related to this lineage in some modern North African populations. It's possible that as the desert advanced, some groups migrated, perhaps towards the coast or the Nile Valley, mixing with other communities. Their unique genetic signature became diluted over time, leaving behind just a faint echo of a lost branch of humanity. It conjures up amazing scenarios, doesn't it? A lost people, thriving in the heart of a Green Sahara, isolated for millennia. It sounds almost like fiction, and this colossal environmental shift, turning a lush landscape into one of the world's harshest deserts, could easily have obliterated much of the evidence. In a very real sense, the Takarkori people represent a lost culture, one that flourished and then faded with the changing climate. So when we talk about lost civilizations in the Sahara, how much weight do theories hold? Could there have been something even bigger, maybe even before the Green Sahara? It's a question that excites many. While the Takarkori people and their contemporaries were culturally sophisticated and incredibly adapted, the current evidence doesn't point towards a massive, technologically advanced civilization like Atlantis in the Green Sahara, let alone earlier. But their profound isolation does make you wonder, what unique developments might they have achieved entirely separate from the historical trajectories we're familiar with? You know what always comes up? The richest structure, the eye of the Sahara. People love linking that to lost civilizations. And visually, especially from space, it's stunning. Those perfect rings. But geologists are pretty clear. It's a natural geological dome, heavily eroded over millions of years. Yes, ancient stone tools have been found nearby, but no ruins, no city, nothing to suggest it was artificially constructed or inhabited on a large scale. So, maybe not Atlantis. But even without ties to it, this discovery is incredible. The real story here is arguably more profound. An entirely distinct human population, living in a world utterly different from today's Sahara, surviving and adapting in isolation for thousands of years. The fact that we can retrieve their genetic story from mummified remains is like opening a door onto a previously unknown part of our shared past. It makes you ask, what else is buried out there under the sand? It really makes you think about the immense power of climate change in shaping human history. Entire branches of the human family tree might have withered, leaving only the faintest whispers in our modern DNA. And perhaps hidden away, there are more stories like Takarkori waiting to be found, not just in the Sahara, but in other regions that have undergone dramatic environmental shifts. While speculations about Atlantis are fun, the true story, the one meticulously pieced together from evidence like ancient DNA, is often far more complex, surprising, and ultimately more meaningful. The story of the Takarkori people challenges our assumptions about the Sahara, about ancient migrations, about cultural exchange, and maybe even about the resilience and diversity of the human spirit itself. What other isolated groups, what other lost lineages are waiting for their stories to be told? And what will those stories teach us about ourselves? It's a powerful reminder that the history of our species is far richer, stranger, and more full of unexpected twists than we're probably even capable of imagining right now. Keep an open mind. The Sahara might be holding on to more secrets than we ever dreamed. The next deep dive could rewrite history all over again.